Hey everybody, welcome back to Volvara, and welcome back to what should hopefully be the last episode of this series, but then again, I think that's also what I said about the episode before this, and there will most likely probably be another episode after this. But in any case, I'm really trying to finish this all up and get to a stage where I feel like it's good enough to make a final video out of it. But you know, where exactly that whole process is going to end, I'm honestly not really sure. I was just hoping that at the end of this episode I would feel done enough to call it a day and work on some final video for the project, but in the end that didn't really end up happening. So what I'm doing in this episode is most of all of the lighting throughout the island. It is at some point that I decided to switch the game to night mode that I realized that the park is actually really underwhelming at night, since I didn't really think about lighting beforehand, and the few lights that are in the park here and there don't really help to light it up in a nice way. So I decided to finally take it upon me to add all the lights to the island and make sure that I can also show this off at night, or when I upload the park file you can actually look at the coaster at night as well. I think that should look quite nice. In any case, I want to give a huge thanks to Gertz from Shy Guys World, who posted a tutorial on the Planet Coaster forums as well a very long time ago already. So at the time we didn't really have that many lights, but it's still an amazing tutorial. He basically posted a tutorial of what to do with the different lights in Planet Coaster and how to realistically light a theme park. And there's lots of useful tips in there. The focus of the tutorial is mostly realistic lighting, so I'm definitely gonna deviate a little bit from it in quite a few places, since this project is all but realistic really. But the ideas of how to use lights and how you can use the specific lights in game, I think are still very much relevant here. And one of the things which I always think is very interesting and noteworthy about that tutorial is the focus on selecting things that you want to light, and of course at the same time selecting things that you don't really feel like lighting. As he stated in the tutorial, and in something which you can definitely see quite a bit, a very common mistake that people make when they're lighting something is to just kind of light it all up and consider the job done when everything is visible, even at night, because it's properly lit. Instead of choosing certain elements that are most important or most striking about a certain building and lighting those while keeping other elements of it perhaps somewhat darker or completely unlit. And I wanted to light up most of the island, since it's kind of floating in the middle of nothing, and I would like it to stick out quite a bit. But there are some corners which I don't really end up lighting, and most of the sort of methodology for me to light everything was to think about the most detailed and the most signature sort of looking parts of the build and try to light those first. So there's going to be a lot of focus on lighting the different spires and elements like that throughout the build. And then there's a little bit of work with color as well, although not too much. I'm mostly just kind of using very muted brown and orange and red-ish colors, very similar to the color scheme of the island itself. And I find when you're doing lighting in Planet Coaster, at least for me, I always like to make the colors a little bit darker, add a bit more black to them, so they're a little bit more washed out, because very often going for completely white or for completely colored lights in Planet Coaster might end you up with some super bright lights and then some super dark areas that really clash with that a little bit too much. So I always like to make it at least somewhat muted. And then I also try to use some sort of similar lights as well for similar areas. So for some of these spires, for instance, that whole plan over there didn't really work out too well. But for some of these spires I'm going with some of the more bright orange and red-ish hues mostly. And then all of the wall sections have a very similar sort of orange hue to them, and then the lowest parts of the island have a sort of more red-ish tone to the lighting. It's something which probably doesn't make much sense as I'm saying it right now, but hopefully as we go through the episode it should make a little bit more sense eventually. So yeah, it's a very sort of easy and simple thing to do. I'm just going around the island, seeing the areas that aren't entirely lit and seeing what kind of light would work best. So for instance, here's the underside of the island, and I didn't want to light up the bottom of the island, but I did want to slightly add some light to the parts where the buildings on the top of the island sort of change into the bottom part, and put some sort of red lights here and there in that section to kind of very mildly light it up and kind of show a little bit of the pipes and crazy like machinery stuff that is going on the bottom of the island, but not too much. It's not really the focus. It's just kind of showing that there's nothing over there. And then for most of the lighting, it's just kind of putting lights around all of these towers and domes and spires, etc. And also lighting up quite a few of the windows. Very often what's just a very easy and fun thing to do is to just put some spotlights on windows and doors and that sort of thing. And what I found actually very often in real life, if you have very classical looking buildings with lots of pillars, very often the lights that light the buildings are placed on these pillars, so the pillars are lit up the most. So that's also something that I try to do quite a bit. And then there's other areas like this as well, like the path, where I just wanted to have regular sort of street lights. This is a really difficult episode to actually put a commentary over, I think, since it's just really kind of all over the place. The real strategy is just to go around seeing what's not lit yet and putting some lights there. That's really all there is to it. There's not too much to say about it. I gotta be completely honest also, I am recording this way late at night, so I'm trying my damnedest not to fall asleep at the moment as well. So I'm sorry if it's not the absolute best commentary ever. Maybe I'll just have to venture a little bit more into personal territory, which is something I never do because I'm that kind of boring YouTuber, I guess, who just talks exclusively about what I'm doing in the game and never reveals anything about their lives outside of that. But yeah, maybe I should do that a little bit more because eventually I'm gonna run out of things to say about light. To be honest though, I'm already sometimes kind of impressed by how long I managed to talk about completely stupid things and keep meandering on and on about certain topics and actually have people listening as well. I feel like at some points my commentaries must just feel like I'm trying to reach the word count on an essay. Honestly, which I guess isn't too much of a compliment to give myself, but I think that's the way I mostly am able to keep talking for long periods of time without actually having to say much at all. On which I also have to say, it's one of those really difficult things to get out of when it comes to the way that you talk in YouTube videos, because I always notice there's a certain way that people talk in YouTube videos that's like sort of very typical for them. And in real life, it doesn't always carry over. At least for some of the Planet Coaster people I know, they just speak in such a different way in real life than they do in videos. Sometimes it's a little bit less so, but very often it still is like you kind of tend to fall into a certain way of speaking when you do these YouTube videos, and it's really hard to get out of that. So sometimes I'm just kind of like, do I speak too quickly? Should I have more silences in my commentary, or is it in any way too meandering? So honestly, if you think anything, if you have any kind of opinion, no matter how harsh or critical it might be of the way I do my commentaries, just drop it in there, because I'm always looking for any way to improve my videos. But I feel like commentary is one of the most difficult things to improve ever, because it's an unscripted thing. Sure, if this was a sort of scripted thing, it'd be much easier to tackle, but because it's so unscripted and it's just kind of what you naturally gravitate toward, I feel like it's something that's really difficult to improve and kind of takes a very conscious effort to work on. In any case, back to the topic at hand a little bit more. I think there's also a bit of a relationship between how important a certain part of the island is in terms of how much of the overall look of the island it makes out, and how much I wanted to light it up. So the top spire is really bright, and some of the domes as well, some of those top cupolas, they're super bright. And then just the general walls of the buildings, I just put some spotlights on most of those from quite a distance often as well, so that they're slightly lit up and you can kind of see them and it looks atmospheric, but it doesn't really draw the attention like the spires and towers do. Now something that is completely out of line and that I sort of came up with on the spot, which you can see me doing all over the place just like I did over there, is adding these round sort of spherical lights everywhere I could. It isn't really something that I was planning to do in the beginning, but I very quickly realized that there were just some spots where I couldn't really hide spotlights too well or put other lights that fit in. And that round spherical light actually just looks amazingly steampunk. So I ended up putting that in a lot of places, especially little decorations, and the lamps themselves kind of function as part of the decoration, I think. Because they fit so well into the steampunk feel of the entire island that, you know, in daytime and at nighttime they still kind of work as a decoration, but they also light up the areas which are very hard to light up otherwise. So you'll see a lot of those little white balls everywhere functioning as lights throughout the island. Oh, and here's a little break from the rest of the video, I guess, in that there were still these two spires that were using the in-game roof spires, and you know, that won't do. This is a Silverrat build. I'm not going to use any of the in-game roof pieces, obviously. If we can use hundreds of small, tiny little pieces that will destroy the game, so the latter is what I wanted to do in the end, and I finally got around to changing these two spires. And to be honest, I'm not really even changing them too much. It's honestly just about the idea of being able to notice that the spires were an in-game roof piece that just kind of takes me out of the immersion of the theme of the island itself, that I just wanted to replace it with something very similar looking but very unique. So I wanted to sort of make my own spire that looks really similar but isn't quite the same. And there's a bit of an advantage to it as well, I think, in that obviously it now matches a little bit more some of the textures which I used on other spires as well. And it's a bit more narrow, it's a bit thinner. I kind of like my spires to be really tall and really kind of stretched out and pointy in an almost Efteling kind of sense. So yeah, that was basically that little break from the rest of the video. I think these kinds of spires are also interesting because they have a more clear demarcation between the different angles of the roof, which is kind of an accident anyway, because I need to put all of those wooden brown planks or beams really between all the different segments to make sure that the shingles don't clip into each other, but it's something that I do like the look of. And this is the kind of thing which I also think it would be really interesting to see how the Theme Maker's Toolkit is gonna affect the game, and that is honestly also one of the reasons that I am trying to hurry up and finish this project, and perhaps also some of my other stuff. Because I really feel like the Theme Maker's Toolkit might be too much of a game changer to still have projects like these running. Because I'd rather just finish Volvara and have it stand as a project of just trying to push the in-game pieces as much as possible and get as far away from any recognizable in-game theme with them as I can, because that's kind of been the exercise, and I feel like as soon as the Theme Maker's Toolkit comes out and you can just import any piece into the game and sort of create any atmosphere on your own, that just kind of defeats the whole exercise of Volvara, which was so much about just, you know, doing ridiculous things with the in-game items. I mean, this thing was started over a year ago, and back then so many of the pieces which we now have and which I'm now using in the island weren't even there yet, so I had to really force my way into the sort of steampunk theme at the beginning, and I feel that that whole idea of seeing the game almost as a puzzle, of trying to create new themes out of the pieces that were given, I think that was a major part in what made Volvara so much fun for me, and what would be totally destroyed if we can add anything we want into the game ourselves. So yeah, I'd like to finish it before that time and just leave it completely vanilla, if that would be a way to speak about these things. Also, some of the other stuff that isn't lighting related, I still had the in-game catwalks on the lift hill over here. and I'm not really a big fan of anything in-game, so I decided to get rid of those things as well, replace them with, well, an adjusted version, really, of the in-game catwalks. So keeping the basic skeleton there, but replacing it with a slightly thicker fence, because I like a thick fence, where I can actually put some lamps and other shenanigans on it as well. Just looks a bit fancier, and it fits in a little bit better with some of the wooden constructions that the lift hill is built on as well. God, I just love it when roller coasters have that sort of like custom supports work. It's something that you rarely see because there's so much engineering trouble, and you know, making coasters like Baron 1898 and Alpengeist, where they have those custom sort of lift hill constructions, is very difficult, but it really just pays off so nicely, I think. It gives it so much flair, and obviously I'm using some supports also because there's no other way. So on the other side of the island there are some tracks that are just kind of floating above the ground, so I obviously had to build some custom supports so they wouldn't end up going straight to the ground in a vertical line and destroying the whole idea of a floating island. But in this case, I really just wanted to signify the lift hill with a very sort of, well, signature looking lift hill structure. Oh, and I wanted to light that up with these lights as well. I was thinking for a while maybe that's too cheesy, like it almost looks like a Christmas decoration in a way. But I just really like how it outlines the lift hill structure at night, and I definitely don't want to overdo the lights either. They're just on this side and they're just following the very basic contours of the lift hill, but it's still something which I think is a fun little lighting addition. The lighting is pretty much done at this point. There are some things which I still need to fix about this park. There are still some floating trees and like little unfinished bits and pieces that I just want to improve a little bit. And at that point I just gotta add some random stuff until I feel like it's done. So next episode is probably just gonna be really random, even more than this time, and now I have no idea what to even talk about, but we'll see how that goes. But after that, hopefully everything should be finished and I can start working on a nice video for this, for which I don't know how much I explained yet, but I'm really looking forward to maybe getting into some editing tricks to make it look as though this is really flying somewhere out there in the clouds, and change the whole environment from the Planet Coaster environment to something much more fantastical. But that's something for another day. For now, thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time.